Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Well, welcome to the New Hampshire Institute of Politics, everyone. My name is Neil Levesque. I'm the executive director here at the Institute, where we have more presidential campaign activity than any other location in the United States. Particularly pleased to that. And right now, of course, it's particularly busy as we lead up until February 9th, our primary. As we did in 2008 and 2012, the Institute of Politics is proud to partner with the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition on their Impact 2016 initiative to engage presidential candidates and their advisors in a discussion about the U.S. role in the world. With just over 2 months until our First Nation primary, with the many challenges we face around the globe, this morning's conversation could not be more topical. Our students here at St. Anselm understand how interconnected our security and prosperity is with the rest of the world, and that pulling back is simply not in our interest. They actively debate and discuss foreign policy and national security issues every day, particularly in this room. Here in New Hampshire, the U.S. GLC has assembled a distinguished group of leaders around the state. Many are here today, made up of business executives, faith leaders, humanitarians, civic officials, military veterans, state representatives, all of whom believe that America must continue to be the global leader and that America's role in the world matters in this election, not only because it's the right thing to do, but because it's the smart thing to do. We are very pleased to join USGLC in hosting this essential discussion. I would like to introduce the President and CEO, Liz Scher, to welcome all of you here today. Liz.
Good morning. Thank you, Neil. It is really wonderful for me to be back here in New Hampshire, and it's really wonderful for the USGLC to partner with the Institute of Politics. We have been partnering for more than a decade, and I remember our last event was here with Senator Ayotte, and our first event, I remember, was here with the former Congressman Jack Kemp. And I remember it because many of you probably know him. He was our HUD secretary. He was vice president candidate. He is one of Speaker Ryan's mentors. He also happens to be a football star. And what I remember about it is that after he gave his keynote speech, we had a press conference just out there. And he did one of the no-nos of press conference, which is when his cell phone rang, he actually picked it up and answered it. And I was appalled by it. And after he talked on the phone, he put it down. He said, it was Dan Snyder, the owner of the Washington Redskins, and he had a question about Sunday's game. Sorry to the New Hampshire citizens. He said, some things are just more important than politics. And I happen to think that as I come to you in New Hampshire, politics is your sport. And I think about all of the different issues and the different polls on your time of where you could be this morning, and that you have chosen to be here to talk about a very, very important issue. And I am very grateful that you have come to talk about the issue of America's role in the world and to discuss with some of the candidates, representatives, about how they will lead in the future. We are honored that so many campaigns have chosen to be here with such distinguished individuals who will share their campaign's views. You know that we live in an interconnected world. The harsh realities of the headlines of just the past few weeks, from Paris to the unsettling situations in places like Syria, Ukraine, and the list goes on, and I know we will talk about them today. That what happens overseas impacts us here at home every day. And I know as our mission as an organization states to build a better, safer, more prosperous world, We need America's leadership. We need strategic partnerships. And in a frightening world, we have to talk about those issues, but we also have to talk about the opportunities and how American leadership can make a difference in all of those. You know, this Sunday, I have the wonderful privilege of leaving to go on a trip, another trip that I get to take to Africa. And I will be leaving there to go to a place, Rwanda and Tanzania. I don't know if any of you been to those wonderful countries? A few of you. One. Just Bob's the only one? Somebody else in the back. And I went with, not too long ago, when I went there, I was inspired by a wonderful visit that I went. It's a country, these are countries that are so different than ours, and you know, you can't have a cell phone just ring, because the citizens of these countries, 2/3 of which do not have access to sustainable electricity. Think about that, from health, from education, from economic opportunity. But on one day, I'm going to go back to visit this what I guess is called a startup in Arusha, Tanzania. It's a company called Off-Grid Electric, and they're trying to bring low-cost electricity of solar panels to homes. And they got a loan from a U.S. government of $100,000, and they transferred that they were able to get $22 million of private equity investment from that $100,000 loan. It was like being in this, you know, I thought it was like the Silicon Valley of Arusha. That was very wildly impressive. But what was inspiring is what happened that night. I went out to what they called a home, what we would call a mud hut. I met the father of this home, Emmanuel. And Emmanuel shows me his single light bulb hanging from his hut. And the single light bulb, he told me the first time he ever turned it on was the first time that his children saw electricity. So he turns it on, the little room, the one single room of his home lit up, and I asked through a translator, how has this light bulb changed his life? He just grinned, and he pulls his kids towards him, and he said, my children can now do their homework. They have hope, and they have a future. I thought when I got home, I took a look at what Tanzania means to us. Our trade with Tanzania has increased 500% just in the last decade. This is our future as well. And I know you understand that, or you wouldn't be here today. You're not alone. A week ago, we launched what we're doing today in Iowa. We had a huge crowd, and when I travel around the country, I see huge crowds. So who are we, for the few of you that are new to USGLC? The Washington Post years ago called us the Strange Bedfellow Coalition. And we got that name because we are a coalition of over 400 businesses and NGOs, everything from Care to Caterpillar, from Save the Children to Starbucks, from World Vision to Walmart. We are across the country, not only from Iowa to New Hampshire, North Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, across the country. We have an advisory committee that includes every former living Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, Condi Rice, Madeleine Albright, and all those in between. We have and very proud to have a growing list of retired military leaders, 160 retired generals and admirals, and over 30,000 veterans for Smart Power. And what brings us together is the same conversation, that we believe America needs to be a global leader, but to be a global leader, you need to have the tools, including development and diplomacy alongside defense. It's a little 1% of the federal budget. A lot of people call it the foreign aid budget, but it is so much more. It is our State Department, our Peace Corps, our USAID programs. It's the diplomats that are out there in Ukraine that are fighting for democracy. It is the healthcare workers that were in West Africa fighting to stop the spread of Ebola. It was the programs that helped create the markets for America's goods and services. It is the supporting our strategic allies like Israel and Jordan. We do it, as Neil said, not just because it's the right thing to do, which is it is, as Ronald Reagan said, we're the shining city on the hill, but also because it is the smart thing to do for our economic and our security interests. So I thank you for being here. Our partners that are listed on the program, we could not do it without you. We also could not do it with the extraordinary members of our New Hampshire Advisory Committee. Today, as I said, is part of what we call our Impact 2016 launch, a conversation with the American public about why America needs to be engaged in the world. We are honored to have 4 national co-chairs. We are nonpartisan in our effort. It includes our co-chairs are Tom Ridge, Madeleine Albright, 2 former secretaries of the cabinet, 2 former majority leaders of the Senate, Bill Frist and Tom Daschle. And it's very simple conversation. We reach out to the presidential candidates. We encourage them to embrace America's global leadership, to understand that as part of our national security, we need to make sure that we use the tools of foreign assistance, of diplomacy, of development alongside defense, to educate them that these programs work, that educating women and girls matter, that preventing millions of children dying of preventable diseases has actually worked, that with our fight against HIV/AIDS, this country has helped save nearly 10 million lives. So we are thrilled that you are here. I am very excited to hear from our keynote speaker as well as our surrogates for the campaigns. You can join us in the conversation. That's what's most important. New Hampshire voices really are amplified throughout this country. Join us with our, if you're on Twitter, through hashtag Impact2016, and I'm excited to listen and be part of the conversation today. To introduce our keynote speaker, somebody that all of you know very well, a leader in the business community here, which is Jim Roche, the president of the Business and Industry Association of New Hampshire. Thank you for joining us as part of the conversation. Jim, please.
Thank you, Liz. As Liz indicated, I am Jim Roche, and I do run the Business and Industry Association. We are New Hampshire's statewide Chamber of Commerce. I also serve on the New Hampshire Advisory Committee of the USGLC. You know, thoughtful business leaders representing companies of all sizes, including the 40,000 LLCs and 26,000 corporations here in New Hampshire, know that our local economy is inextricably linked to the economic currents of the world. In fact, 95% of the world's consumers live outside of our borders, and the fastest growing markets are in the developing world. These are our current and future markets. America's strategic investments in diplomacy and economic development are critical to advancing our interests in these markets because they help fight corruption, they help promote the rule of law, and they help open markets for America's goods and services. Critical programs like the United States Agency for International Development, the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, and the Millennium Challenge Corporation keep America competitive in the global marketplace, which is key to our own economic prosperity at home. To underscore these points, please take a look and listen to these future leaders.
With our economy the way it is today,
some people are asking why we're spending so much money overseas
and not on creating jobs right here at home.
Well, actually, we're not spending much money.
Just 1% of our national budget goes to the international affairs budget. That's not a lot.
And helping create American jobs is just what that money's doing.
If you want to create jobs, you have to create more demand for products and services.
You need more customers.
And where are American companies finding more customers?
Not here, but here.
And here.
And here. 95% of the world's customers live outside the U.S.
95%.
When we sell goods to them, they're called exports. U.S. exports accounted for a big part of our economic growth last year.
Half went to developing countries.
And their economies are growing 3 times faster than developed countries.
And every 10% increase in exports equals a 7% increase in jobs here. So, how do we increase exports?
Build new markets for American goods and services. Remember that 1%?
America's international affairs budget helps fund programs
That improve health and education.
supports agriculture development, builds a stable economy.
And creates new markets.
So if we don't go to the biggest, fastest growing group of consumers,
Other countries will. Other countries already are.
Investing a small amount in global development and diplomacy,
It's not only the right thing to do.
it's also the smart thing to do.
To make our economy stronger. To create more jobs.
For my mom,
For my dad.
or my neighbor,
For me.
Great video, very articulate kids. Well, allow me to shift gears just for a moment. I'd like to recognize the men and women here today who've sacrificed so much in defense of our nation and our most deeply held values. They deserve our appreciation and our support for their service to our nation. And I would ask all the veterans in the room to please rise so we can salute you. Please rise, veterans. Thank you. Thank you for helping to make the work we do here in New Hampshire and around the country possible. It's now my honor to introduce our special guest this morning. Unfortunately, due to a medical emergency, Admiral Mike Mullen was unable to join us, but sends his sincere regrets. However, we are extremely fortunate to have Lieutenant General Daniel Chrisman with us. General Chrisman served as assistant to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and as an advisor to the Secretary of State Warren Christopher. He also represented the United States on NATO's Military Committee and served as superintendent of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. General Chrisman has been a longtime friend and advisor of the USGLC and has not only been influential in advocating for the military, but also for the civilian side, importantly, for the civilian side of our national security toolkit. It's a special honor to have him with us this morning and to benefit from his insights into a challenging world. And I will tell you that I'm work with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and I've heard General Chrisman speak, and he's very compelling. You will enjoy his comments and the conversation that follows. And again, following the General's remarks, he'll be joined on stage for a conversation with New Hampshire One's political director, reporter, and anchor Paul Steinhauser. So please join me in welcoming to the stage General Dan Chrisman.
Thanks very much. Jim, thanks very much for those kind words. It's great to be back in New Hampshire. Appreciate this great audience. I've always said if you want to see democracy in action, you come here. This is not my first visit to New Hampshire. When I was informed that Admiral Mullen had a problem with his knee replacement, something I sympathize with, having gone through that myself, I told my wife a couple of nights ago that I'm coming to New Hampshire. And she said, "Do you know where we spent our first night of marriage?" We were married in Sturbridge, Massachusetts, and headed north. And I said, "Yeah, it was in New Hampshire." She said, "Do you remember the town?" And I said, "Keene." And then she said, "Do you remember where we stayed?" And I said, "I really don't." But Susan said, "I do." And it was the Winding Brook Lodge in Keene. So, thanks to the web, I got on the website for the Winding Brook Lodge. It still exists, and it says, Winding Brook Lodge, 2.5 miles north of Route 12, 60 fireproof rooms, all with ceramic tile baths. So, I started 48 years of marriage on a great road, in a great town, in a great state. Our topic, in your folder. America's global leadership, what's at stake in 2016? I don't want to be flip, but what's at stake in 2016 is America's global leadership. Now, this is not unique. It's not unlike, frankly, virtually every presidential election, certainly since World War II. But with the chaos that Liz described and the global opportunities, plus the challenges, we're at a very historically unique turning point. And how can that leadership be assured? Well, what makes generals, admirals like myself passionate about this is that we all understand that leadership cannot be ensured unless all elements of national power are on the playing field. And that means not just the kinetic elements of national power, the military that I represent, but those diplomats and those professionals who help with economic development, private sector particularly. They have to be on the field as well. And all of us have argued not just for the increase in the defense budget, I would probably argue for that, but as well for fully funding of that tiny slice that the children so well articulated, the international affairs budget. And you've heard the comments from some of my colleagues on the placards in the halls or publicly. And probably the most succinct is General Jim Mattis, retired Marine four-star, who said, hey, look, you don't fully fund the State Department. I need more bullets. But others have said the same thing. Our new Secretary of Defense, Ash Carter, in talking, which I'll mention in a few moments later about China, but in talking about national security, he said, hey, look, Trans-Pacific Partnership, this new U.S. plus 11 other nation Pacific trade deal, that's the equivalent of one carrier battle group in the Western Pacific. We just hosted Admiral Harry Harris, the Pacific Command commander at the Chamber of Commerce 2 days ago. He's the author of this famous phrase, the Chinese Great Wall of Sand in the South China Sea. Said the same thing. As a Navy officer, he would, of course, love a carrier battle group. But he also said, look, the Trans-Pacific Partnership is strategic. That was forged by American diplomats. And Secretary of Defense Bob Gates, a real hero of mine personally, someone I traveled with frequently when he was the Deputy Security Advisor to Brent Scowcroft, he always would argue, either sitting next to Condi Rice or Hillary Clinton, the Secretaries of State at the time, he would argue for their budget as passionately as he would argue for the budget for his own department. And why is that? Why do Gates, Admiral Mullen, who would have been here, Admiral Harris, Ash Carter, Jim Mattis, why do they say this? Because first they understand that any victory that's attained kinetically by military force cannot be sustained unless it's followed by diplomats and developers who sustain the peace. And further, probably as importantly, maybe even more importantly, they understand that having those suits on the ground, first, the diplomats and the economic developers, can help preclude the outbreak of conflict. And we see this around the world today, in the Balkans, in Latin America, in Colombia especially, in South and Southeast Asia, where suits on the ground precede boots on the ground. So that's the basic theme. What might be helpful, though, to internalize this a little more deeply is to do a very quick national security tour d'horizon. What will the new president of the U.S. face in terms of security challenges? So what I thought I might do is just run through very quickly three of what I think, what most folks would think would be the top three challenges. But let me also say, although there are challenges out there, the world is not entirely aflame. There are opportunities as well. Let me talk about one strategic opportunity to complement the challenges. So what are the three challenges? One, most obviously, Liz has previewed this, and you hear it, you see it every day, and that's the deepening attractiveness of the jihadist narrative, number one. Number two, our friend Vladimir, representing Russian revanchism, this idea of a restoration of Russian influence regionally and globally, if not of territorial acquisition. And finally, China. China's rise and how the U.S. and China can accommodate overlapping strategic interests. On the jihadist narrative, I think what's very clear as a result of Paris, the Russian airline bombing, and the attacks in Lebanon. ISIS has global reach. They are the most worrisome terrorist organization in history. And what they are acquiring now is a caliphate that's far broader in influence than just that which exists in Syria and Iraq alone. Their affiliates, which number about 36 in 15 countries, continue to grow. And whatever is reduced in territory in Syria and Iraq is more than compensated for by the acquisition of affiliates elsewhere. In this penumbra of ISIS influence, there are three key U.S. friends and allies in this region that are increasingly threatened by the ISIS narrative, by the ISIS ideology. Those three are Jordan, Egypt, and Tunisia. No country is more on the front line than Jordan itself. Egypt has its own ISIS affiliate called the Sinai Province that was responsible for the takedown of the Russian airliner. And Tunisia, the only Arab Spring democracy flower that continues to exist. What's the best way to preserve the integrity of those three countries? It's economic growth and it's political inclusiveness. And who does that? Diplomats and economic developers, those professionals funded by the international affairs budget. Our friend Vladimir holds a pair of twos in his hand. He has an economy that's shrinking by 3 or 4%. He has a brain drain. He has a demographic challenge. He faces economic sanctions from the European Union. But he's playing those pair of twos like he has a full house. And what he has done in his actions of late, not just in the Crimea, not just in the Donbass region of eastern Ukraine, not just in Syria, but I would argue even more worrisome is the information campaign that he is running, state-controlled media that's flooding the international airwaves with the Russian narrative. In the old Cold War days, I've spoken to several here before this meeting, those of us that dealt with the Soviet Union, negotiating with them as I did for 4 or 5 years, we would have called that back then propaganda. And back in the old days, back in the Soviet days, what Vladimir now represents is this long-term goal of undermining the U.S. transatlantic unity with our European friends and disrupting the EU's perilous unity, which continues to exist. He does this through this information campaign that is Cold War world class. What's the best way to counter that? With a counter-information campaign, with an aggressive diplomatic outreach to our European allies that are worried and need U.S. leadership. Who does that best? American diplomats who are funded by the international affairs budget. And finally, China. I'm not declaring China as an enemy. That's to be determined. We just had this opportunity to host Admiral Harry Harris, as I said, the author of the Great Wall of Sand narrative, who described this China island building campaign. 3,000 acres in the South China Sea over the last 24 months have been constructed, artificial islands that have clear military purpose. The Chinese narrative would tell us, oh, look, other countries in the area, Vietnam, Philippines especially, are building their own artificial islands. Yeah, they have. 200 acres in 40 years. China, 3,000 acres in 24 months. The neighbors in the area are worried. Now, don't get me wrong, they're still going to be trading with China. Business relations with Beijing dominate. But they need a U.S. presence. They need an assurance that U.S. leadership will be there when it's necessary to provide freedom of navigation, U.S. security concerns. But that's exactly why Ash Carter said what he said. If you're worried about China, pass the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's a hugely important deal, economically for sure. New Hampshire exports, certainly, but it's an important sign of U.S. strategic commitment. So that's the summary of the three most important. I would say, just as a quick aside, an opportunity, huge strategic and business opportunity is India. Thanks to this consistent vision on the part of three presidents, Clinton, Bush 43, and Obama, who have over time built a critically important strategic partner in New Delhi. And what's caused that is this unbelievable outreach by critical diplomats. My most moving story is Colin Powell and his deputy, Rich Armitage, who in 2002, on the brink of nuclear war between India and Pakistan, stepped in and kept nuclear Armageddon from occurring on a very, very critical boundary. Who did that? Diplomats. U.S. boots on the ground, zero. But India as an opportunity, strategically and economically, for the next president, is a vitally important objective, and it was achieved, that success was achieved, thanks to far-sighted U.S. diplomacy. Let me just end with a quick comment. I don't want the audience to think that it's just 4-star admirals and 3-star generals and American diplomats who are arguing for this triad of defense, development, and diplomacy. You go out now and talk to some sergeants and lieutenants and captains, those who were on combat outposts, on provincial reconstruction teams, conducting humanitarian relief, training new allied armies and armed forces. You talk to them, and they'll say the very same thing that Admiral Harris, that Jim Mattis, that Ash Carter are saying. But when they say it, it has special resonance because they've seen it on the front lines, how important it is to partner with the other elements of our national security team at the ground level. On a personal story, the very last patrol I ever took as an officer was in Kosovo in 2000. I was the superintendent of West Point at the time, and the division commander of the Big Red One, the Army's 1st Division, was John Abizaid. He was my commandant, and Abizaid said, "Hey, Chrisman, get down here. You got to see how your lieutenants are doing. They're doing great." So I flew into Macedonia and helicoptered into Kosovo, into this giant camp called Camp Bonsteel, and went out to a small combat outpost, strapped on some body armor, and we went into a Kosovo town called Gilani with 12, 13 other soldiers and an Army lieutenant from the West Point class of 1998 named David Blank. And as we went into this village, this was within 9 months of the cessation of the Kosovo War in 1999, which would have been, frankly, yet another genocide, thanks to Milosevic, of these Kosovar Muslim Albanians. We saved that country, saved these villages and towns from the depredations of Slobodan Milosevic. And as I was walking with Lieutenant Blank into Gilani, it wasn't just the security we were providing to a small Serbian enclave that was in that town. It was the reaction of the people, and it was the development that was taking place from mosque to playground to business offices, thanks to the far-sighted vision of our ambassador in Macedonia, who was the emissary to Kosovo, Ambassador Chris Hill. Everywhere you saw, Kosovo was coming alive. The result of that was, if you today, any American, were to go into Kosovo, you would be greeted as a hero. The reaction, the pro-American reaction in that country tops the list of any countries in the world. And it was the result of development and diplomacy alongside the kinetic forces that saved the country, but built the town, preserved a fragile peace, thanks to the triad of defense, development, and diplomacy. It's a powerful story, and it shows what can be done when all the team is on the field. Let me stop there. Thank you for your attention, and let me just say, the world is watching this. And if the world wants to see democracy in action in a classy, first-class, passionate way, just come to Manchester, just come to New Hampshire, and they'll see it fully played out. Thanks very much for all that you do. I appreciate it.
General,
Thanks. Thanks very much.
good to have you back here in New Hampshire.
Thank you.
Like that story about 48 years ago.
48 years.
Hard to believe.
Winding Brook Lodge.
Well, you mentioned your admiration for Secretary of Defense Bob Gates. So let me quote from him. He said, "We cannot kill or capture our way to victory in the fight against violent extremism."
Right.
Since he said that, we've seen the rise of ISIS. We saw the horrific attacks in Paris just a few weeks ago. So my question to you is, what do you see as the key elements for the U.S. in fighting the longer game against combating their ideology?
It's a long game, and we need to make sure that we have a game plan and strategic patience to make it work. Am I coming through? Okay.
You are.
Okay. As I've studied this, there are at least three dimensions to it. One is the kinetic dimension. The caliphate itself, that physical terrain that exists in Iraq and Syria, has got to be reduced. I urge all of you to read, if you haven't read it, the March 2015 Atlantic article by Graham Wood. What does ISIS want? It is the most compelling read on the narrative, on the caliphate, and on their goals. And one of their goals is the establishment of the caliphate that we see physically. As long as that exists, that builds the legitimacy of the ISIS narrative. So there has to be a kinetic dimension to this. The other terrain that's being fought is the digital terrain, given too little attention. That's why I mentioned a little bit here the counter-narrative. Some of that has already started, but the attractiveness of the ISIS ideology is transmitted in thousands of ways through social media in a way that needs to be countered intelligently and ideally through a Muslim narrative, working with Muslim friends and allies. And that's the third piece. If we're going to address this kinetically and in the digital realm, we need Islam's help. Let's be candid. A portion of this battle, in fact, some would say a large portion, is religious. And so we need the assistance of those grand imams and grand muftis in the religious centers of the Islamic world, beginning, for example, with Al-Azhar University in Cairo. The president of Al-Azhar, the grand mufti in Cairo, the grand imam in Egypt, need to speak out. Actually, they have. A compelling narrative was actually the grand mufti in, of all places, the grand imam, in Riyadh, Abdulaziz al-Sheikh, who said ISIS is enemy number one. He said ISIS is not of our religion. But some way, that narrative needs to be transmitted both digitally and by leaders that are respected in the world of Islam to counter the long-term game plan of ISIS.
I believe we have time for a question or two from the audience. So why don't we get to that? Are there microphones? Raise your hand if you want to ask a question to the general. Let's see one in the back.
Always in the back.
Nowhere near a microphone. It's on its way. Oh, here we go.
Karen Erickson,
Hi, Karen.
Dean of Arts and Sciences at Southern New Hampshire
Nice to see
University. As you know, we have about 12 million Syrians who have fled the country. Half of those 12 million are children. And the title of what we're trying to discuss today is America's role in the world. What is America's role in the world with respect to that situation?
Yeah, there are so many dimensions to this. Probably the most important near-term dimension is to help the countries I just mentioned that are on the front line, especially Jordan and Turkey. Each of those countries probably has 1 million plus refugees in country that place enormous stress both on the resources and, frankly, in the case of Jordan, on the politics. And so assisting those countries, we provide in the most recent budget an increase in aid to Jordan. Just given the strategic importance of Jordan, it could be 10 times that amount. So that's one. And second, I think there's been a reasonable look at what the U.S. refugee policy for immigration here needs to include. The worry, of course, is that those who are traveling to Europe into the Schengen zone then can acquire access here to the U.S., particularly, let's say, French nationals who have traveled to Syria, passport exchanges, et cetera, and come into the U.S. as visitors, visa-free. And I think it's logical to look at information exchanges with Europe, to tighten the visa-free inquiries for an intelligence standpoint to make sure that refugees are not, that terrorists are not masquerading as refugees through that refugee policy into the states. But most importantly, I think, on the near term, it's to help those countries sheltering the refugees and to ensure that the best refugee resettlement policy is to solve the civil war in Syria and to allow them to return to their native country. And that's exactly why the Secretary of State is pushing in Vienna for a political transition. You think the Iranian nuclear deal was hard. I mean, trying to get this settled to ease Assad out and get a transition government to stop the war is inordinately more complicated. But that's the long-term solution. The long-term game plan is to solve the Syrian civil war.
We have time for one more from the audience. I see someone in the back.
I'm Barry Conway. I'm an interested citizen. Those of you who know me, I've been told to be very, very short, so this is going to be more of a comment, General. Just the, you know, this has been going on in the Middle East, as we all know, for at least 2,000 years. The Sunni and Shiites and how can we make sense of this and get some resolution, even begin to get some resolution? Just how can we make sense of this first and go from there, General?
Yeah. There have been periods of relative stability in the Middle East, but over the last several generations, it's been very, very hard, Barry. I wish all of us had a simple solution on this. I think the important role for a new president is to make sure that we understand what our priorities are and who our allies are, and to do all that we can to defend and protect them. And if there is a model that one might use, not to be particularly partisan here, but Bush 41 was confronted on August 2nd, 1990, with a completely changed circumstance in this region that you've just described. This is wonderfully outlined in the John Meacham biography of Bush 41 that was just published. So Bush is flying back from Camp David, and he has all these competing arguments about, well, Saddam's invasion of Kuwait. Kuwait was just really a province anyway of Iraq. Let's let this go. The real issue is Saudi Arabia. It's not Kuwait. And Bush 41 got off the helicopter and said, this will not stand. And he led. He was adaptable. He knew how to build teams. And he knew what our key friends and allies in the region were, who they were, and what we had to do to protect them. Israel with anti-missile systems, the Saudis with stationing assistance, and then, of course, the liberation of Kuwait that followed. So I think in moving forward, this has to be an issue in that region that's solved by the region itself ultimately. Politically, as they transform from authoritarian post-colonial rule, and religiously. But we have a role to play, and again, it's a role that has to be with a clear vision and an outline of where our friends in the region are, and an understanding that it's not just Arab and Sunni Shia. It's also Arab Persian. It's Iran. And understanding that dynamic adds even more complexity to it, and frankly, even a greater necessity to sort out who our friends are going to be for the long term and support them.
General, we want to thank you very much for joining us today, and we hope when you have your 50th anniversary, which is coming up soon, you come back here to New Hampshire.
Back to Keene.
Back to Keene, exactly, sir.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, General.
Thanks.
I don't know if I trust Dupree standing behind me, right?
Hey.
I'm Juliana Bergeron. I'm the New Hampshire Republicans National Committee woman. And if I have to be part of a group of strange bedfellows, what better group to belong to than this one? I'm a proud member of the USGLC's New Hampshire Advisory Committee. I want to thank Paul and the General for their thought-provoking discussion. You underscored the many ways that U.S. global engagement play a vital role in protecting our national security, so thank you. And General, I happen to be from Keene, by the way. As our first in the nation primary is fast approaching, we in New Hampshire take our job of vetting candidates very seriously. With recent events still on all our minds, particularly again after yesterday, we all know our next president needs to be prepared to deal with the dramatic challenges in these turbulent times throughout the world. USGLC's Impact 2016 initiative seeks to educate the candidates and the campaigns on the importance of continuing strategic investments in all areas to advance our economic security, our national security, and our humanitarian values. As the campaign for president heats up, this conversation is more important than ever. And given the enormous challenges we face to ensure that candidates seeking the White House and those candidates seeking congressional seats understand the need to use all the tools in our toolbox to advance our interests and values throughout the world. We look forward to hearing from the campaigns about what their candidate is saying or planning to do about America's role in the world. And now my good friend, National Committeeman Steve Dupree, will introduce the campaign representatives who have joined us.
Thank you. You're welcome. Good morning, everyone. This is a lot easier to do than preside over the Republican Debates Committee, so I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Juliana. We're soldiers in arms protecting the New Hampshire primary. I also want to tell you I'm very proud to be a member of the USGLC's Advisory Committee. I had the opportunity this year, was it late last year, to travel with the USGLC to sub-Saharan Africa to see firsthand and explore how America's overseas investments benefit and protect our national security and economic interests. I can tell you it was life-changing for me. I was able to see firsthand how U.S. development programs are partnering both with American businesses and nonprofits to build more stable, peaceful, and economically viable societies. And what I saw over there in what was a whirlwind, hard-working week left me with great hope and leads me to hope that many of the candidates coming through New Hampshire these next few months will help us articulate their vision and their vision for this country, for our role in the world, and how American leadership requires embracing development and diplomacy programs to build a better, safer world. Our first in the nation primary gives us a unique platform to showcase to those seeking to be our next commander-in-chief that we here in New Hampshire understand that in an international world, there is no pulling back and there is no substitute for American leadership. I encourage all of you who plan to join me in reminding these candidates every opportunity we have to do so that we need a range of tools to advance our interests around the world, including our development, our diplomacy programs, alongside our military. That said, we are honored to have such a distinguished group of representatives from our Republican presidential campaigns with us this morning to discuss America's role in the world and what's at stake in 2016. And I'm going to introduce all our panelists, and then they'll all come up at once. We can give a round of applause after I've introduced them all. We've got Judge Michael Mukasey here representing the Bush campaign, Major General Robert Dees representing the Carson campaign, Bob Grady representing the Christie campaign, Senator Bob Smith representing the Cruz campaign, our neighbor, Congressman Dave Emery, representing the Fiorina campaign, Senator Gordon Humphrey, representing the John Kasich campaign, and Congressman Chris Stewart, representing the Rubio campaign. Please join me in welcoming our panel and moderator, Paul Steinhauser, to the stage. Welcome, gentlemen.
Park in your space.
Robert, how you doing, buddy? Good to see you. Looking good.
Good morning.
Excuse me, I don't want to trip over the lights.
There you go.
Nice to see you.
Should have
You got it, sure.
How are you, Steve? Yeah, you look good. Please.
Hello.
Nice to see you.
How are you? David, good to see you.
Hi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi. How are things? You're from what, Utah, right? Yes.
Great introduction.
All the big guys together. Gee whiz.
Really? That's better than cold and white.
Make it.
All right, as you guys take your seats, can you hear me? Is my mic on? There we go. Just want to echo what everybody's been saying. This is a very impressive, distinguished group of panelists here, surrogates for the campaigns, and we are honored to have you guys. I think one thing's pretty obvious. From the beginning of this election cycle, national security, terrorism, foreign policy, Americans' global leadership, it was an important issue in this campaign, much more than in the last two. But since the horrific attacks in Paris, it has become the top issue for the candidates and for most of the voters. So the timeliness of this forum, it's really spot on. We're 2 months from the primary here in New Hampshire, the first in the nation primary, and this is the issue that is on everybody's minds. Today, we have an opportunity to hear firsthand what the candidates think about America's leadership in the world, what it should be, what they want to change it to. And we're going to organize this discussion in three elements. We're going to talk about national security, and we're going to talk about economic prosperity, and finally, we're going to talk about America's values. How did we get this panel here? There were some rules. We, USGLC, looked at the most recent polling here in New Hampshire and took an average, and the top 10 campaigns were invited. We got a pretty good response, a pretty good RSVP, as you can see right here. We're going to have the surrogates. They're going to be given 2 minutes to answer the questions. There is a clock in the back, and I will try to keep everybody to those 2 minutes, but we can be flexible, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. And we also ask you guys, everybody here in the audience, we want your questions. There are cards on the tables. Please, if you have a question, fill them out, and representatives from USGLC will be coming around and collecting them, and we'll try to get those in as well. I think, as we were talking about, since 9/11, military leaders have been among the strongest voices for strengthening the civilian tools of engagement. And I quoted Bob Gates before. I'm going to quote Bob Gates one more time. It's his big morning. Development is a lot cheaper than sending in soldiers. And I think he was spot on that. So with all that, let's jump right into this. And let's start with Judge McKasey. For Governor Bush, how do these elements come together to tackle the challenge of extremism? He's talked a lot about stressing American-led alliances, American diplomacy, American military power, and American credibility in defending the peace and deterring the violence. So how does it all work out? How does it all come together?
Well, first, I'd like to thank the USGLC and St. Anselm for sponsoring and for hosting this discussion, this enormously important discussion, and a very civilized discussion at a time when not a whole lot of civilized discussions are going on. So I think that is enormously welcome. Governor Bush has stressed American, as you pointed out, American-led alliances and American diplomacy, as well as American military power. He was the first candidate, I believe, who articulated a strategy for fighting extremism in a comprehensive speech that he delivered in a very highly symbolic place, the Reagan Library, a speech entitled "Taking on Islamic Terrorism." He named it, and that was, I think, that's a very important feature of dealing with it. He stressed that American credibility expresses itself in several ways, but beginning with calling the threat by its name. ISIS is both a symptom and a cause of a larger problem, controlling as it does now a territory about the size of Indiana. He stressed that the United States would have to lead a coalition of forces in the area, including supporting the Kurdish Peshmerga in Iraq. We have an air force that can impose a no-fly zone and can impose safe zones to slow the flow of refugees. These people don't want to leave their country. They want to be able to stay in their country safely. And he has a strategy for doing that. How does this all work? I experienced this when I was Attorney General. I visited Iraq. I saw 2 programs administered by the Justice Department called OPDAT and ISITAP. The details are not important, but the point is that they were administered by the Justice Department with funding from the State Department, protected by the United States military. And how does that manifest itself ultimately? It's a story about when the Soviet Union was teetering on the brink, and I've got 3 seconds, so I'm going to have to curtail this.
Got to speed it up, Judge.
Pardon?
Got to speed it up. No.
Yeah, when the Soviet Union was teetering on the brink, a family in East Germany got itself onto a train, and they were told, keep the shades down, keep the door locked, that's your only hope. And they rumbled for hours until finally one of them couldn't stand the tension anymore, and he raised the shade just a little bit and saw outside some American troops were part of a mobilized cavalry unit, and shouted at the top of his lungs, "We're free." That was the achievement of every veteran in this room, and that was the achievement of an active foreign policy. And that's the kind of foreign policy that Governor Bush espouses.
Thank you very much. Congressman Emery, Ms. Fiorina has said that her counterterrorism strategy combines military commitment, economic development, and diplomatic energy. So my question is, for her, how does she combine all this to reinforce the military in the fight against violent extremism?
Well, I think, as the General said in introductory remarks, it's critical that we do. And it goes without saying that Ms. Fiorina is committed to a strong military with the equipment, the training, and the manpower to respond to critical military challenges in today's world. And it's constantly changing. She also understands, however, that the role of diplomacy and the role of development around the world is critical to reinforcing that effort. Now, how does diplomacy work in this regard? We tend to think of it simply as putting coalitions together for military purposes. But in fact, it begins much earlier than that. First, we have to understand the ethnicity and the culture of the countries in which we're operating. We can't respond well to international challenges if we don't understand and relate to the people. On a more technical level, we can put together coalitions to share intelligence, critical intelligence about security challenges and threats. We can put together coalitions of countries that may not have a lot in common, but countries that face a common threat. And diplomacy is critical to making that happen, particularly in the environment of the Middle East. We can rally our allies and friends to help deal with miscreants, countries that are off the reservation, threaten human rights, or support ISIS and other terrorist organizations. We can address diplomatically particular challenges that we have in areas like Syria, Israel, the security of Iran and Iraq, and the issues that surround those complicated questions. And then finally, the role of development is critical, because we know, as we have seen for millennia, that nations that don't address critical questions like poverty or disease or helplessness are training grounds and breeding grounds for terrorism and instability. So that is why it's critical to bring those 3 elements together in a comprehensive foreign policy to address our security and the security of the regions that we care deeply about.
Congressman, thank you. Congressman Stewart, Senator Rubio, he has been a strong voice for American development and diplomacy as, quote, essential elements of our national security. How do they reinforce the military in this battle against extremism?
It's a great question, and first, before I answer that, if I could, thank the GLC. I'll do this very quickly, and to thank all of you. New Hampshire has a really a very unique role in this process, and much of the nation and much of the world I hope that wasn't me.
That may have been me.
Much of the nation looks to you to set the tone for the debate and for the election, and we're grateful for what you do. I have to tell you very quickly a little bit about myself so that you understand why I'm representing Marco Rubio here. I was an Air Force pilot for 14 years, flew combat rescue helicopters in the B-1. I'm a multiple New York Times best-selling author, writing primarily on history and the idea of American exceptionalism. I sit on the House Intelligence Committee as well as Appropriations and Foreign Ops. So this is, in many ways, my world. It's where I spend the majority of my time. And when I listened to Marco speak, the first time I heard him speak, it was as if he were speaking something that I had written. He and I are so aligned on this. This idea that he speaks about, unabashedly, unafraid to say that America has...
I'm not going over there anymore, I promise.
Okay. Reclaiming my time.
Go for it.
Sounds like the debates committee.
We may not like this responsibility that we have of American exceptionalism, of America's role. We may not seek that, but it's the reality of the world. And if we won't lead, as Marco has said again and again, we leave the world in a much more chaotic and a much more dangerous place. He unafraidly says we have to engage ISIS. We have to engage in these parts of the world that we've talked about already. Vladimir Putin, China, and others. But along with that military engagement, as a former military officer, I understand there has to be political follow-up. Strategically, long-term, the problems that exist after the military intervention have to be dealt with as well. And Marco talks about, as an example, the Sunnis in Iraq after that expedition. The political process wasn't sufficient. It aggravated what was already a deep problem, and it left it much worse. Have to have the military, have to follow up with the political and the other structural problems. Again, he understands that, as I think, frankly, most of us here and most of the candidates that represented at this table do as well.
Congressman, thank you. If I start walking over this way, please somebody tackle me. We don't want any more of that feedback. Mr. Grady, Governor Christie has said, will America stand up and fight the fights that need to be fought? And I don't mean just militarily, I mean diplomatically and economically. Our question is, what role would diplomacy and economic engagement play in the national security strategy if Chris Christie was in the White House?
First of all, I too want to thank the USGLC and St. Anselm's and the Institute of Politics for having us here today. Let me say that any effective national security strategy has to begin with a commitment to economic growth. And if you look, as Richard Haas and others have said, our own national security begins with being strong at home and getting our own house in order. So Governor Christie has presented a comprehensive plan to increase economic growth, tax reform, making the United States the home of innovation, a national energy strategy, et cetera. And I hope we'll have time to get into that. But the reason that's important is that one of the reasons we have a problem today is that President Obama is the first president since the Second World War who has not made growth the organizing principle of U.S. economic policy. And as a result, we've had a weak recovery. He's made redistribution a more important priority. We've had a weak recovery, averaging 1.5% to the low 2%. And we've had the U.S. sounding an uncertain voice, an uncertain trumpet in terms of being committed to policies that will create growth, freedom, and prosperity around the world. So the roles that you ask about, I think Governor Christie has several beliefs. First of all, diplomacy is critical. And it starts by building and growing strong relationships with those who agree with us and those who we want to agree with us, with our allies. I did serve for President Bush 41. As General Crispin said, he was very attentive to that exact issue. I think this president's been under-attentive to our most important allies in the United Kingdom, and Israel, and Canada, and Mexico. And Governor Christie's already begun, frankly, building relationships in those countries. Secondly, development is crucial. I think Governor Christie has a philosophy that we should support those countries that are pursuing rule of law, political freedom, economic freedom, growth, policies that will induce growth, which will make the entire world better off. In that regard, by the way, he would be a strong supporter of free trade agreements. And there's some disagreement between the parties and even among Republicans on this issue. And I think, again, President Obama has been late to support free trade agreements that were negotiated by President Bush. He was late to get the votes for free trade, for Trade Promotion Authority. And in that regard, the growth of trade, which has been so beneficial to the United States over multiple decades after President Reagan, has slowed under this administration, and therefore the global economy and global wealth has slowed. He would support investing in defense. And we can go into, he's endorsed the recommendations of the Bipartisan Defense Panel. We can talk later about troop levels. I don't think we have time in the 2 minutes here, but I just want to say the last thing. Congressman Stewart mentioned American exceptionalism, and what Governor Christie has said is, look, American exceptionalism is not a punchline. It's a set of principles. And on this issue of foreign assistance and investment in defense, this is a systematic problem, and this is the last point. It's, again, an economic point, which is we talked about it being 0.3% of U.S. GDP, 1% of the budget. It's 0.3% of U.S. GDP. It was twice that under President Reagan. But all discretionary spending, both domestic and non-domestic, will be under tremendous pressure because we have let entitlements grow out of control in this country. This governor is the only one with a program to cut the growth of entitlements, a plan that will save $1 trillion. And if you don't do that, you will systematically underfund a lot of things that will make us more competitive and successful in the world, including foreign assistance and research and economic leadership. So I think that's the last piece. You will suffer what the Harvard historian Niall Ferguson calls the fatal arithmetic of imperial decline.
Thank you, Mr. Grady. General Dees, Dr. Carson has said his foreign policy will be, quote, proactive, not reactive. So what are the key elements of that proactive policy in the fight against extremism in a Carson administration?
Well, thank you. It's good to be here. Thanks to USGLC and the partners in the great Granite State. As a West Point lieutenant, I used to come up here and as a cadet to ski at Cannon Mountain. So I know your nice icy trails well.
Training.
Yeah, that's right. It's good training. Two things. I think that leadership makes a difference, and Dr. Carson's leadership is exactly what our nation needs at this point in time. And what do I mean by that? Because you have a lot of discussion about the experience factor. The bottom line is that Dr. Carson has a lifetime of leadership, complex decisions, integrating diverse opinions, people that come at him with life-death decisions, and he has to have a strong moral compass, and then he has to have the moral courage to follow through with those decisions and be accountable for them. So that's the type of leader Dr. Carson has been his entire life. Secondly, with all due respect to the other candidates, I think Dr. Carson has had more 2 a.m. calls than anybody else combined. In the middle of the night, life-death decisions, people calling him, what do we do, doctor? What do we do? And he makes those complex decisions boldly, and he understands what that real-life decision-making is about. That's what our Commander-in-Chief needs to do as well. Dr. Carson knows that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. When you talk about the pound of cure, we tragically are into that now with ISIS at our doorstep. I won't go into details, but Dr. Carson has likewise laid out a very definitive plan about the defeat of ISIL in Iraq and Syria, and then the defeat of ISIS in a broader way globally. That's a longer term and a systemic issue. The notion that this is violent extremism is important, but in specific, it is radical Islamic terrorism. He understands that. He understands what it means to cut out a cancer. He understands what it means to apply strong medicine. And Dr. Carson is prepared to do that. He's done it many times. He's prepared to make those tough decisions and live with them. Secondly, ounce of prevention worth a pound of cure. The ounce of prevention is just what we're talking about today. It's not just the hard power, it's the soft power. It's the combination of all elements of national power to a collective cause. And in Dr. Carson's administration, he'll really emphasize 3 things. First is a stronger defense. We understand how we are weakening there. Secondly is alliance management. Dr. Carson understands the need to support our allies in every way possible. And then thirdly is specifically, we must employ this foreign aid and international development in the right ways, pervasively across all the elements of national power. And I would say he has 3 criteria. One is that this international aid and foreign development ought to be accountable, it ought to be focused, and it ought to be consistent with American values and interest in support of our overall national objectives. So I'll end here. It's great to be here. I think that this international aid that we're talking about is a prime example of a proactive foreign policy tool.
General, thank you. Senator Smith. Senator Cruz has stressed that he sees the fight with ISIS as a, quote, ideological war. For Senator Cruz, Is the military enough to win that battle?
Well, first of all, let me say it's always a precarious position to be the surrogate for someone, especially those of us who have been surrogates for ourselves for so many years. And sitting here with these gentlemen so close to me, I'm reminded I sat for 12 years on the Senate Armed Services Committee right next to John Warner. And I finally got up the nerve to ask him what it was like to be married to Elizabeth Taylor. And he said, you know, I was her sixth husband. He said, on our wedding night, I knew what to do. I just had to figure out how to make it interesting. So I think that's our challenge here. But that's me now, not Senator Cruz. In a short time, it's very hard to get beyond sound bites with an issue as deep as this. But Senator Cruz talks about this balance. First of all, the answer is no. Of course, the military isn't enough to win an ideological war. We have a great military, the best in the world, but it's designed to do certain things, and what we've been asking it to do in the past few years has not been what it's designed to do. And so Senator Cruz uses the term sweet spot, somewhere between military intervention, and isolation. There is a spot that we have to use to get that balance to accomplish those goals of defeating the terrorists and being the strong and remaining the strong world leader that we are. But, you know, when we look at all these candidates, it's not just how you feel on the issues. You've got to look at a candidate with the temperament, with the knowledge, the intelligence. Senator Cruz is one of the smartest people I've ever encountered. He's quick. He's on his feet. He learns quickly. And I've spent hours talking to him about military affairs because I spent so many years on the committee. But what he would say is, look, it's a death struggle with Islamic extremism. Always put your national security first. Leadership of the U.S. is critical in the world, but we should be very reluctant to deploy military forces abroad. If you do, fight to win. Your honorary chairman, Colin Powell, said it best: define the mission, have an exit strategy, hand the ball to the military, and let them do the job. And that's the kind of leader we need, somebody who can delegate, who gets the people that we need to do this. So I know I'm out of time. I just close by saying, if you look at the mistakes, if you look at the people on this board and this organization who are ex-generals and admirals and veterans, why are they here? Because they know that development and diplomacy are critical, and we don't want to use the military in such things as nation building, their hands tied behind their backs in the engagement process in the battles. So therefore, in conclusion, I think Senator Cruz would say, look, economic sanctions, move our allies together in a strong position, such as Israel and Jordan and others, and also allies in the other regions of the world as well. Pull it together, fight when you have to, with sanctions, with development and diplomacy. Thank you.
Senator Smith, thank you, and thank you for sharing that story about Senator Warner and Elizabeth Taylor. I never heard that one before.
That's a true story.
We no doubt. Senator Humphrey, thank you for joining us. In addition to the military dimension, Governor John Kasich of Ohio has emphasized the need to counter ISIS with American messages of freedom, opportunity, and respect for women. How would he, as president, strengthen our ability to project these messages?
Thank you, Paul. Good morning, everyone. General Chrisman, ladies and gentlemen. All thanks and praise to this great institution, St. Anselm's College, and to the coalition for this important forum this morning. Governor Kasich sends his greetings. He's actually here in the state for 3 days. We'll be in Manchester at 1 p.m. this afternoon at the American Legion Sweeney Post on Maple Street. Invites everyone here, cordially invites everyone here to come and hear from him in person, indeed to ask him these questions in person. So I hope you will join him. Paul, you asked about messaging. Based on his 18 years on the House Armed Services Committee, John Kasich believes that the first message we ought to send ISIS is the message of total and complete destruction by military force, or to use the nice term that General Chrisman chose, kinetic, the kinetic element. That's a very nice formulation. You have diplomacy and you have kinetics. That's very nice, but and valid, and so very true, and both are equally important. So I understand the question. It goes beyond the military, but John Kasich is clear on that point. He has laid out a detailed plan to rebuild our nation's defenses. You can consult that document in its entirety online at johnkasich.com. Now, to address the question more broadly, how do we project power apart from military power? To reduce it to a very pithy sentence, John Kasich believes that to defeat terrorism, we must drain the swamps where terrorism breeds and grows, and from which the terrorists export their acts of inhuman violence. We must drain the swamps. So how do we do that in the economic and diplomatic sense? I think John would say that actions speak louder than words. The words are important, but actions are even more important. And I think that one could say that when John traveled to Rwanda just a few years ago with the entertainer Bono, who's a crusader for humanitarian relief, as you know, that he was speaking with actions as well as words, that when he interceded with his colleagues in Congress and with the president to provide humanitarian assistance to that country, that he was putting words into action. And that is what we need more than anything on the diplomatic side is action. We can't be all things to all people, of course. As chairman of the Budget Committee for 6 years, who produced the last 4 balanced budgets we've seen, federal budgets in the last 40 years, John Kasich knows more than a thing or two about limited resources and stretching those across budget necessities. But we can and must recognize that the diplomatic and the economic parts of our arsenal, if you will, are as important as the military and must be adequately funded. I will have a good deal more to say on these subjects in the greatest specificity possible. I see that my time is already expired, but I will expand on these themes in the next rounds. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do need to remind you all that the clock is there, and I'm going to get a little tougher enforcing it.
I know my pain.
Yeah, I know your pain. Just I've moderated a few debates. So, though, Judge, you were very good at keeping almost to 2 minutes in the first round. But let us move on to economic prosperity. Here's a fact. In today's economy, 95% of the world's consumers are outside the U.S., and the last 2 administrations have focused on promoting economic growth as a key to reducing global poverty. Let's jump right in. General Dees, Mr. Carson has praised American business investment in the developing world, calling it a, quote, win-win in the fight against hunger and poverty. But how does Dr. Carson's American economic engagement as part of his broader foreign policy advance U.S. interests in a more prosperous and peaceful world?
Dr. Carson knows that if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. But if you teach them how to fish, not only that man, but that family, that community, that nation, how to fish, then you feed them for a lifetime. And that's one of our real goals in this whole process, is creating self-reliance. So that's been his entire life message, and that's certainly the message of his foreign policy. He has traveled and worked in 57 different nations around the world, and were he here, he would emphasize 2 points. The first would be education. Aristotle said the primary task of any civilization is the education of its youth. Dr. Carson believes deeply in education. That's why he has over 100 Carson Scholars Programs in Title I schools around the United States. That's why internationally, in Nigeria, for instance, there are medical residents from the Carson School that are going all across Africa to spread health and spread economic opportunity. The second point is that economic engagement is critical as well. And part of that is the foreign aid that's an important catalyst. We're not just talking about foreign aid just in itself, but we're talking as a jump starter for a lot of public-private sector investment around the world that has an even greater magnitude. It's basically mobilizing the capital of investment to generate growth in these other nations and creating economic partnerships that help nations grow out of poverty and hunger. Dr. Carson would cite a Cameroon example where there's vast acres of fertile land that are being commercialized. It's for the good of the local people that are developing their economy, and it's also good for the American investors that are investing in that. And that's what we would like, is for the Cameroons, for instance, to know how to fish economically, to know how to create their own productive economy and create value of themselves. And then that's our goal for a more prosperous world. Secondly, there's a lot of good economic engagement in the developing world by U.S. public and private sector entities, but we must do more. We must do more. China knows this. We must know this. Thank you.
Thank you. Congressman Stewart, Senator Rubio has said about American global economic engagement, quote, "We need to have millions of people around the world that can afford to trade with us." So how would he, as president, use development and diplomacy to open and build markets for American businesses overseas?
Again, a great question. I'd like to say that as an Air Force pilot, I could fly to the Middle East, fly 18 hours, drop a bomb within plus or minus 1 second. I can also adhere to my 2-minute limit here. So
thank you, Congressman.
You know, the kids here got it right. 95% of the consumers outside the U.S. Marco, this is one of the foundations of his campaign, this 21st century jobs, 21st century America. And look, if you believe being an introvert is the answer, look at North Korea. For heaven's sakes, if that were the answer, they'd be the most prosperous country on earth. And exactly the opposite. I think there's 2 questions. The first question is, why is trade good? And I think there's 3, maybe 4 primary answers to that. The first one is that it's efficient. It allows for the free exchange of goods and services and capital and people and ideas. The second, as we've illustrated here and talked about a couple times, and spending, again, my time in Congress and my area of responsibility actually is sub-Saharan Africa. I have seen again and again and again how a dollar spent there can change people's lives. But the primary way to do that is through trade. It's through economic activity, economic freedom. Third thing is it creates wealth. I was a businessman. I would love to trade with China. I would love to trade with India. I'd love to trade with South America. So trade is obviously in everyone's benefit. The second question then is, how do we do that? TPA and TPP are good starts. The TPA gave the president the authority to negotiate a trade deal. Now we have to look at that deal and decide, is it the right thing? Is it a good idea? Marco has said, as Republicans have said for generations, we believe in free trade. But it has to be a deal and an agreement that is to our benefit as well as to our trade partners. I don't know that it is yet. Marco has said he doesn't know yet that TPA or TPP is that right agreement. We're still looking at it. It's very complicated. But I hope that it is. I believe it would be to our benefit if the president would negotiate something that we could support.
Congressman, thank you. And right on 2 minutes. Perfect. Appreciate that.
Plus or minus 1 second.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Judge McKasey, Governor Bush has praised U.S. investment in South Korea, saying, quote, "It will bear fruit for generations." Now, 60 years ago, South Korea, it was an aid recipient, and today it's our 6th largest trading partner. It's a strategic ally, and it's an aid donor. So the question is, how and where would Governor Bush as president engage the next South Korea?
Well, luckily, it's not as if he's a newcomer to this. He was involved with USGLC when he was governor of Florida, maintaining and developing relationships with foreign countries to the extent that he could as governor. And it's not as if the United States really here is starting with a blank slate. We have a proven record since World War II of building security alliances and trading partnerships that are essential to preserving world order. It's important that the U.S. take the lead from the front, that is, in negotiating good multilateral trade agreements that set the rules of the road and make it clear that it's in our interest to see other societies rise so that they can purchase American goods and services and agricultural products. We can also do that by helping the world tackle corruption and organized crime, which don't exist only over there. They come back over here. We see their manifestation in gangs in the United States. We see their manifestation in a failure of those societies to be able to purchase American goods. We can continue to fight global poverty by developing a strong economy, which is why the governor has committed to strong economic reforms, spending reforms that will deliver the kind of economic growth that Americans need and deserve to develop jobs. We have a tax policy now that's meant that businesses are disadvantaged in the global markets. Governor Bush has recommended a sharp change in that policy so that funds that have to be kept overseas can be brought back here to develop our economy, to develop jobs so that we can sell goods to the remainder of the world. And with regard to economic development, we've got a better story to tell than any other country in the world, and he knows that. We've certainly got a better story to tell than China, which is perceived to be a rising power, and yet it's rising only insofar as it's able to steal intellectual property from other countries, and it's sitting on a demographic time bomb. While governor of Florida, he took measures to develop relationships with other countries and has made it clear in his economic program how it is that that's going to benefit us going forward, right on the zero.
Perfect. Thank you, Judge. Senator Smith, Senator Cruz is a very vocal advocate for free trade. Now, when today's fastest growing economies are in the developing world, how would a Cruz administration work to strengthen Americans' competitiveness and business opportunities in these emerging markets overseas?
Well, Senator Cruz has spoken to this on numerous occasions, and I think we have to look inward before we look outward. We have to be strong at home economically in order to be strong economically abroad in terms of development and helping other nations. We need to reduce our national debt, which is close to $20 trillion. We should release some of the burdensome regulations on our businesses that are keeping them from being able to produce and to compete in the world, reduce the tax burden, access our own natural resources, which we've neglected to do over the past few years. But the bottom line is we cannot continue to engage emerging markets abroad if we're weak at home economically. So we have to address that. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to do what all of you and most of us in this room would like to do. So I think Senator Cruz would say open up diplomatic channels for businesses through the private sector, encouraging the private sector to invest. It's not all government. Challenges, though, that could threaten us. Let me just throw a little caution to the wind for all of you. The general mentioned this triad of jihadism and Putin and China. I might add North Korea to that, General. But we have to be sure, that where we send this money does not fall into the hands of these people and others that hate us. And that is a big challenge. We cannot afford to chase our own technology, especially asymmetric technology, communications, satellites. All of this kind of stuff is so critical to the success of American military policy, American foreign policy, and American success. So we've got to be vigilant, and we have to be careful, and we can't just chase profit for the sake of profit and let our guard down on areas that we might where we might lose and chase our own technology. And I kept it within 2 minutes.
But we owe you 2 seconds back. We'll get you in the next round. Mr. Grady, as governor, Chris Christie has led numerous international trade missions to promote New Jersey's business opportunities abroad. Now, as president, how would Governor Christie promote America's economic and business interests abroad?
Well, you're right. He has led these trade missions. When he went to Israel, for example, he was not only briefed on the security situation, he went to Tel Aviv, he met with the venture capital community. He's been to Mexico, he's been to the United Kingdom, he's been to Canada. In every case, he met with Prime Minister Netanyahu, he met with President Peña Nieto, met with former Prime Minister Harper in Canada, he met with Prime Minister Cameron in the UK. In every case, he was an advocate of trade, of cooperation, of growth, investment. He promoted both foreign direct investment into New Jersey, which he would do, attract capital to the United States, as well as opening markets for U.S. exports and U.S. manufacturers. In that regard, that's been part of his strategy for making New Jersey a home for growth. I mean, this governor was delivered a state that was in decline under John Corzine, and in his tenure has created 200,000 private sector jobs, has cut the unemployment rate in half from just about 10% to a little over 5%, and has done it, by the way, by balancing 6 budgets in a row and vetoing 5 tax increases. Now, I think the trips to Mexico and Canada were particularly instructive because as a state that is a home where 22% of all the jobs in the state are related to trade, he's a believer in the benefits of trade. And he talked about how Mexico and Canada, first of all, trade with those countries has exploded since NAFTA was enacted. Mexico and Canada now account for 1/3 of U.S. exports, and they're the primary export destination for 41 of the 50 states. And what he pointed out, most importantly, is that we are on the verge of a North American energy renaissance between more production in the U.S., more production in Canada, and reforms in Mexico that will help the North America become self-sufficient in energy, which will both improve our security and also make us more competitive in the global economy. But to do those things, you've got to ramp up infrastructure, support the Keystone Pipeline, for example. You've got to open global markets for U.S. crude. We should get rid of the ban on export of U.S. crude, and we should promote exports of natural gas. You've got to reduce foolish regulation. As Senator Smith said, it's crushing the U.S. manufacturing sector. And you've got to promote North American integration. So, I think this embrace of trade and open markets, I come from the venture capital business. After I left the White House, I was the chairman of the U.S. National Venture Capital Association. And we have got to to make the United States a home for growth. That means promoting trade for export, but it also means attracting capital to the United States.
Thank you, Mr. Grady. Senator Humphrey. Governor Kasich often speaks of his travel to Africa with the rock singer Bono when he saw the impact of American investments in promoting economic growth in Rwanda. He said that American economic engagement can create, quote, access and involvement in the parts of the world where it's vital. As president, how would the governor strengthen America's tools of global economic engagement to promote this access and this economic growth?
Paul, I want to return to that wonderful expression of the challenge that lies before us. We must, to defeat terrorism, we must drain the swamps where terrorism breeds and from which they export their acts of terror and violence. So what characterizes these, these swamps? Poverty, clearly. Disease, clearly. Hopelessness, clearly. And so our non-kinetic elements, if you will, must, as efficiently as possible and as directly as possible on a targeted basis, attack these problems. The mechanisms of the Millennium Challenge Corporation provide a good model. This is not, what I'm saying now is not a blanket endorsement or a blank check from John Kasich, but he recognizes the principles that underlie the Millennium Challenge Corporation, namely those of careful selection of partners for participation in that program, careful year-by-year monitoring and grading of those participants to make sure that they're performing according to their promises, their assurances, the contracts. These, by the way, to back up for a moment, they're qualifying features. The qualifications of these chosen participants is good governance, which is unfortunately not very common in many parts of the world, a commitment to the rule of law and the protection of property, and election by democratic means and the enactment of law by democratic bodies. But the mechanisms of the Millennium Challenge Corporation are working quite well and should be applied even more broadly to the foreign assistance function in general. In terms of economic development, John Kasich, of course, believes in free trade with the usual caveat that it is fair trade. And let me say on that subject, especially to those who might have been injured by what they regard as unfair trade practices, that it's clear to Governor Kasich that the mechanisms of redress are far, far too slow. He wants to implement an expedited mechanism of hearings and redress actions. The mechanisms that now exist are so very slow that by the time justice is secured, let us say, and justice denied, as Attorney General Mukasey will tell us all, justice denied is delayed is justice denied. Companies can go bankrupt, literally, and thousands of jobs can be lost while the grieved parties are waiting for some kind of action. Again, my time is up. I have more to say, and I will wait my turn. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Congressman Emery, after leaving the private sector, Carly Fiorina co-chaired a prominent effort on global development that called for strengthening partnerships with the private sector on challenges like food security and global health. Where does Ms. Fiorina see the greatest potential for public-private partnerships in fighting poverty?
In a word, Carly Fiorina is firmly committed to the principle of public-private partnerships as a new and evolving mechanism by which we can focus the world's attention on the growth of free enterprise, private sector economies, which she believes is best suited to lifting poverty-stricken people from their dire situation. She feels very strongly that we have to develop new mechanisms for addressing poverty. to match the new situations that are evolving in the world. Consequently, she participated in a study sponsored by the Center for Strategic and International Studies called Our Shared Opportunity, A Vision for Global Prosperity. There were several very interesting conclusions in that study. The foundation was that we needed to turn away from the traditional model of traditional foreign aid and government-sponsored programs and engage the vitality of the private sector, both here and in countries in which we participate. The idea is to generate entrepreneurism, to focus a basis of economic growth in the population, to build infrastructure, to address issues of education and healthcare, and to provide a fundamental basis for sustainable, broad-based economic growth that reaches the entire population in these countries. This is absolutely critical because if we rely only on traditional taxpayer-funded foreign aid and don't tap into the resources of the private sector, both here and in allied, more wealthy nations, then we simply won't have the resources that are necessary to address this problem. And we should note that there have been any number of instances over thousands of years of world history where instability, terrorism, and all the havoc that it wreaks have sprung up because these issues have not been fundamentally addressed at a human level. It is Califiorina's commitment to use these new techniques and these new policies to make a real difference for the evolving world.
Congressman, thank you very much. Let us move on to round three, which is American values. And I think it's fair to say that many Americans, including plenty of people right here in this room, are involved in fighting global hunger and poverty, partially as an expression of the core values of helping the neediest in our churches, in our parishes, and our synagogues. In the last 25 years, American strategic investments in poverty reduction and global health have shown some remarkable results among them. The number of people around the world living in extreme poverty has been cut in half. Just an interesting, very remarkable figure. Let's jump right in here. Congressman Stewart, Senator Rubio, he has been a leader in the Senate in promoting American efforts to advance the rights of women and girls around the world. For Senator Rubio, why is it important that America leads on this important issue?
Well, I think there's a couple of reasons. I think first is that, like most of us in this room, Senator Rubio is a parent. And if you want to touch someone's nerve, talk to them about their children, especially in my case, my young daughters. The second thing is he understands, and he says this again and again, that this is emblematic of American exceptionalism, of American ideals, of America's role in the world. If you want to protect the most vulnerable, that is a core American principle. And by the way, that means protecting the most vulnerable by in some cases, targeting those who are violating the most vulnerable. U.S. has an obligation to lead on this. I actually have, this is a bit sensitive to me as well, and the last book I wrote was with Elizabeth Smart, who many of you may recall her story of being taken and exploited for a long, long time, and what an amazing person, and the courage that some of these victims, both in the U.S. and overseas, demonstrate in working their way through some of the vulnerabilities and some of the great, challenges that they've been left with. Marco has been effective, and I think we don't talk much about this, but he's been so vocal on this one issue, and that is, if you want to protect them, one of the simplest things we could do, it's inexpensive, it's effective, it makes a difference, and that is ensure that they have a birth certificate. Now, that's something we hear go, well, what does that even mean? Of course they have a birth certificate, but in many cases they don't in developing countries. And that gives them the kind of establishes them for them their credibility. This is who I am as a person. This is my family. This is my community. And without them, it leaves them extraordinarily vulnerable. I was in Nigeria recently looking at our efforts to reclaim some of the Bochi girls. And again, that's one of the things that's a great illustration of how this touches us as Americans. When we saw those 280 or so girls that were taken, there was a great outpouring of support, of outrage for that. And I think that's one of the reasons that Marco's leadership on this is so important. At the end of the day, in conclusion, because this is our last round, At the end of the day, we have to choose someone who can win. We have to choose someone who understands America, who has a vision for our future, someone who can lead. That is why I am so proud to represent Marco. And thank you for the questions, and to the audience, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Congressman. This is remarkable. Due to American contributions, millions of lives from HIV and AIDS have been saved across the world. And for the first time, we're seeing the potential of an AIDS-free generation. Judge Mukasey, Governor Bush has called the U.S. Global... Governor Bush has called the U.S. Global AIDS Initiative, quote, one of the great success stories that has taken place over the last 20 years. For Governor Bush, how do these programs, how do they strengthen America's role in the world?
Well, Governor Bush understands that the United States has two advantages over every other country in the world when it comes to programs like PEPFAR, programs like technical assistance generally, medical assistance. Number one, we have a level of voluntarism and charity in this country that is unequaled anyplace else. Our citizens respond to national emergencies not only here, but in foreign countries in a way that is multiples of the response of any other citizenry of any other country. That's the kind of people we are. And secondly, we have a level of achievement in the United States in the areas of medical research, in the areas of agriculture, in the areas of technical achievement that is unequaled anyplace else. So we have the instinct and the ability to project that overseas. That gets results, and it also assures that people overseas have an opinion of the United States that is close to what we are, not close to the way we're portrayed by our enemies. But you have to understand that the fight that we have with extremism is not simply a matter of economics, and it's not simply a matter of poverty. And in that sense, I differ perhaps a little bit from my colleague down the table here. Osama bin Laden was a millionaire many times over. Ayman al-Zawahiri, his successor, is an ophthalmologist. Assad is an ophthalmologist too. I hope there were no ophthalmologists in the audience. The people who crashed the airplanes into buildings on 9/11 were students. They were middle-class people. This is not simply a matter of poverty. This is a matter of an appeal of a fundamentalist idea that we are going to have to face by identifying it, as Governor Bush has, and by ripping it out, root and branch, and that is going to take a lot of effort. But that, along with our record of voluntarism, our record of technical achievement, is going to tell a much better story. But in order to do that, we have to empower people like the imam referred to by General Chrisman at Al-Azhar University. I visited with that man. He proclaimed that Sunni Islam has been making a mistake for decades in misleading its students. I wouldn't want to write a life insurance policy on him. But we haven't publicized his idea. We haven't empowered him. We haven't empowered the people who are around him and spread it where it can do the most good, that is, among the people who find appeal in the message of ISIS.
Judge, thank you very much. Senator Humphrey, Governor Kasich has praised American efforts to provide vaccines, clean drinking water, and sanitation in Africa as, quote, a vital tool in terms of projecting the kind of face of America. Now, what would John Kasich do as president to ensure that the world sees this kind of face of America?
Well, as a preference, Paul, I want to say that it's a pleasure to be with all of my colleagues, but especially Congressman Stewart, because he's a pilot. And I'm a pilot, and pilots, we need more pilots in government. You know why? Because they think logically. They don't think emotionally, as do most members of Congress, right? They think logically and linearly, and we need more of that, may I say. And also, it's a pleasure because he and I, now speaking strictly for ourselves, are hatching a little plot here that would involve a joint ticket. There seems to be some disagreement, however, over which should be here and which should be here. I want to emphasize that speaking only for myself and not any campaign. To return to the subject at hand, the draining of the swamps of poverty, disease, and despair. We spoke of the Millennium Challenge Corporation, sort of the government end of this process. But we also need to, the governor knows from his experience in growing business and jobs in Ohio, where he's been very successful, 350,000 jobs, by the way, while shrinking the employment of the numbers of state government employees, I might add, that it's important to involve the private sector to incentivize both with fiscal or monetary incentives and rhetorical encouragement to incentivize the business sector to get involved. The greatest percentage of consumers today are abroad, not here, abroad, and our business firms need to tap into that market. So we need a very active involvement by the next president of encouraging the business sector to get involved as partners in helping us drain these swamps. Now, to return to the matter of, or to turn to the question about America's voice, we all fondly remember the Voice of America, don't we? Those of us, say, more than 30 years old. And its counterparts, Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty. Well, I'm sorry to say, if you don't know, those wonderful implements that were used so well to use the Cold War have fallen into a terrible state of disrepair and decay, to the point where even Hillary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State, testified before Congress saying that they were almost useless in projecting America's message of truth and of American values, of equality, of the preciousness of each individual human life, of democratic institutions, the rule of law, respect for private property. We have no voice today. And likewise, we have no voice not only in the traditional broadcasting sense, but in the new media that is made possible by the internet throughout the world. Governor Kasich has pledged that in his first 100 days, he will move to reconsolidate these now scattered elements that have fallen into disuse and disrepair into one strong centralized agency, as used to be the case under the United States Information Agency till it was broken up in the 1990s. And to put that agency under a strong executive head and to proclaim America's message anew, clearly, boldly, and using all of the advanced technologies that are available to us today, which unfortunately are being used so very well by Vladimir Putin and by these non-state terrorist organizations, in their cases, to recruit young men to their dirty business.
Thank you, Senator. Your flight time is over on this one. All right. Congressman Embry. After leaving the corporate world, Carly Fiorina dedicated much of her time to organizations committed to fighting extreme poverty, partnering with USAID, the Inter-American Developmental Bank, and the World Bank. Now, as president, how would she ensure America leads the battle to end extreme poverty around the world?
Well, as your question suggests, Carly Fiorina has dedicated a great deal of her post-corporate time to working on exactly those challenges. And to get a flavor for the leadership she would provide as president, we can look at some of the things that she has done and continues to do in this arena. The first that comes to mind is the One Woman Initiative, which she founded in cooperation with former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. This program was focused primarily in Muslim countries to address needs of Muslim women, dealing with such things as domestic violence, training in political participation, legal issues, and very importantly, funding economic growth for small businesses and in farming. She participated in the structure of a program called Good 360, which uses technology and American logistics to focus donations of aid and unused supplies and equipment to areas around the world where they are greatly needed. One problem that most people may not be aware of is the fact that when a disaster strikes, all kinds of aid arrives, but it may not be in the right place at the right time. This program has distributed some $7 billion of goods and services to the places where they were most needed. And probably the most poignant story comes from her experience as a co-chair of an operation called Opportunity International. They provide microloans, some $9 billion in the form of 30 million individual loans with an average of $300. Now, you might ask, what good does that do? But the example is from a family in the Philippines. A woman borrowed $115, bought 3 piglets. From the profits from selling those 3 piglets, she bought a sow and one would assume with a private partnership. The sow then produced more piglets. Then she bought a used sewing machine. And soon she had a business that involved selling pork, selling piglets, selling food, selling rice, and selling clothing. And in a tearful explanation to a visiting group of diplomats, the woman said, "Now my house is full of gold and we'll never be hungry again." That's the kind of leadership that Carly Fiorina will bring to the challenges of international development. You know that she will because she has done it in the past.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Grady, Governor Christie has said America's efforts to fight HIV and AIDS in Africa are, quote, not only the right thing to do, but, quote, the smart thing to do because a healthier African continent is better for world peace and stability. In the White House, what would Governor Christie do to strengthen America's commitment to fight disease around the world?
I'm glad you brought up the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief because PEPFAR is a terrific success. It's really the largest health initiative ever undertaken by one country to solve a disease. And I have a personal connection to it. It was my brother-in-law, Dr. Tony Fauci, who's the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease at the NIH, who drafted that program with Josh Bolton and Kristen Silverberg in the White House, put it in George W. Bush's 2003 State of the Union. And you have to, and I think, frankly, President George W. Bush hasn't gotten as much credit as he deserves for this singular success in American, both foreign, and foreign policy. You have to think of the context. At the time, you had 17 million people who died of HIV in Africa, 25 million infected, and now you look today, 5 million people have gotten retrovirals. More than 1 million babies have been spared mother-to-child transmission at birth and have been born AIDS-free. And most importantly, infections and deaths are down by about 1/3. And so it's saved millions of lives. Now, what does that mean? 3 things I would say about it. One, what does it mean about Governor Christie's policy? First of all, it's consistent with Governor Christie's view. And when he said, some of you may have seen the video that went viral of Governor Christie talking about addiction. He's pro-life. And his definition of pro-life is being pro-life from the moment of conception till death. And this is consistent with that. This has saved millions of lives. Secondly, I talked earlier about sensible regulation and sensible investment. The governor's a believer in cost-benefit analysis, and I think any analyst would tell you that one of the most effective ways to both save lives and promote economic growth and development is to invest in things that give you the greatest bang for the buck in the developing world, including treating sewage in the developing world so you're spared infant deaths from diarrhea-induced malnutrition, addressing diseases like malaria and rotavirus, as smart people like Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation have done, frankly, played a role in PEPFAR's success. The third thing I would say about it is this. This was a bipartisan initiative. You think about it, Mike Enzi from Wyoming was one of the advocates, Ben Cardin, a Democrat from Maryland, Jesse Helms and Bill Frist from the Republican side, John Kerry from the Democratic side. It was bipartisan. When I talked earlier about Governor Christie's achievements in New Jersey, one of the things that I think is important about that is he's been able to do those things with a legislature that is majority controlled by the Democrats in both the Assembly and the Senate. And so, like the U.S. GLC, some things should not be partisan. And I think promoting this type of development, preventing death in developing world, which is not only good as a humanitarian issue, it's good for economic development because you look at the success of Africa with 5% GDP and $1 trillion in foreign direct investment in the last decade. That's a success that most people don't understand. This has contributed to it, addressing these problems of extreme poverty. So it's both the morally correct thing to do, and it's a great investment.
Thank you very much. Senator Smith, Senator Cruz has praised the fall of the number of people living in the extreme poverty, but he said, quote, we can do more. Now, for Senator Cruz, how does the legacy of American relief to the neediest around the world, how does it reflect our role in the world?
Well, first of all, let me say thank you to everyone for being here and thank you for the hosting of the conference. This room in and of itself is about legacy because we elect the people who make the decisions, who have made the decisions in the past and who will make them in the future as to how we conduct that balance of the triad that the general spoke about, which was diplomacy, defense, and development. It's not about one in isolation. It's about putting the 3 together and creating the vision. We don't need a Mr. Goodwrench to do that. I don't mean that to be funny. We need somebody who has a vision, who has the vision, the understanding, the leadership, the intelligence, the way to interact with people and who understands the Constitution, who understands sovereignty. And we can't let this deteriorate into just a program about foreign aid, because it's so much more than foreign aid. Foreign aid, we give money to people that hate us. We should not do that. We should not let money fall into the hands of people that hate us. Senator Cruz says that all the time. Let's use the Reagan model. Think about it. Think about it. Right in this room, probably over the years, Reagan was trashed. He was going to blow up the world. Turned out to be one of the greatest presidents ever. He went to Reykjavik, and he came out of that meeting turning down a deal because he would not give up on SDI. His wife told him he was wrong. His staff told him he was wrong. He did the same thing at the Berlin Wall. How many people came out of poverty and out of the horrible plight in this world just because of those decisions? The wall fell. Communism went down. And people came out of that shadow and they created wealth, and we're now dealing with them and making it. That's what leadership is about. That's what Cruz is about. I'm telling you, this is why it's important that we look this field over carefully and make the decisions that we need to make to be proud to take us into the next generation of leaders and in that legacy that we had to build on. Thank you.
Senator, thank you. General Dees, Dr. Carson just recently returned from visiting refugee camps in Jordan, where he praised American humanitarian assistance. For Dr. Carson, how do these humanitarian efforts advance our own interest and America's values?
Thank you. Dr. Carson has a leadership gift that includes actually listening to others and taking expert advice. Now, that's a novel idea, isn't it? And Dr. Carson was wondering about our most pervasive problems on the U.S. border. He went down there, he looked. Dr. Carson went and walked with the people of Harlem, the people of Ferguson, the people of Charleston, South Carolina, to understand their problems, to empathize, but also to derive common sense solutions to those problems. That's what Dr. Carson does. That's who he is. That's why he went to Liberia. On his Liberia trip, he had some interesting observations. It was the picture worth 1,000 words. He heard from the people themselves, and he heard that their true desire was not to come to Minnesota, as he said, or not even to New Hampshire, but their true desire was to stay in their land where they had their roots, where they had their livelihood. They wanted to stay in Syria. They wanted to return to a peaceful situation. And so that's their true desire, and that's really what's best for them. Bringing Syrian refugees to America, as we know, maybe poses some near-term national security problems, but it's also not the best thing in their long-term interest. Secondly, he has been quick to applaud the Jordanian compassion. It's amazing when you really get into the details. 50,000 Syrian babies have been born in Jordan during this crisis. They're running 2 shifts a day of schools. In the morning up through mid-afternoon, they have Jordanian students, and then in the second shift is the Syrian students. All the young Muslim boys are learning karate in those camps, and they're just other types of interest, in developing the youth. So the Jordanians are really reaching out. 80,000 refugees alone in the Zatari refugee camp. And the Jordanians have a shortfall of $3 billion, which is interesting, the same amount of money that America spent on Halloween candy just a couple of weeks back. Dr. Carson also applauds the U.S. humanitarian assistant, but he thinks we can do much more. And he recognizes it's not just about U.S. government support, but it's about the support of the caring hearts from American people. Regarding values, the reality is that this is who we are as a country. This is what makes us an exceptional nation, and this is who Dr. Carson is as a leader, helping the less fortunate, the more vulnerable, helping those people, not just in America, but around the world, truly experience the opportunity for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's what Dr. Carson stands for. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all of our panelists for a very lively and informative discussion. Just stay on the stage for one more minute. I want to invite Liz back to the podium.
Well, first, join me in thanking Paul Steinhauser for his fabulous job. I know you all know him and get to see him every night on the news, but I want to thank him for leading our effort. He squeezed us in between an interview of Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, he told me, so thank you. And join me again in thanking all the campaigns who took the time out to be here with us today. And gentlemen, you are fabulous, each and every one of you, for sharing and learning about your candidates' views. It's hard to speak on behalf of someone else when each of you in your own right are so inspiring and so knowledgeable, and I thank each and every one of you. So last but not least, it's all up to you. February 9th, I am inspired because I know that with your help, you have a seat at the table that the rest of the country does not have. And you will be meeting and visiting with their candidates and a few others. And I just ask of you one simple thing: to continue this conversation, to ask them what is their view of America's role in the world, to remind them that you do care about these incredible issues that you talked about. You care about our engagement around our interests in security, economics, and humanitarian values. And what I am convinced after sitting with all of you today is that with your help and with the gentleman that spoke with us today, with General Chrisman, your wonderful words that kicked us off, that together we will build a better, safer, and more prosperous world. Thank you very, very much for joining us this morning.